There is a sentence on the back of almost every bag of dog and cat food sold in the United States, printed small, sitting just below a bold line and usually just above the feeding guide. It is the only sentence on the package written for the buyer by a regulator rather than by a marketing department, and it says that the food inside is complete and balanced. Most people read it, if they read it at all, as a quality mark, meaning that somebody checked, the food passed, and the phrase is the receipt. What it records is narrower than that, because it is a claim about how the manufacturer satisfied a rule, and there are 3 different ways of satisfying that rule, all 3 of which produce a food described as complete and balanced. 2 of those routes can be completed without any animal eating the food at all. The third can be completed by a food that has never been fed to anything, on the basis that a different food, made by the same company, once was. None of this is concealed. All of it is set out in a model regulation that most states have adopted into their own law, and that regulation goes further than most labeling rules. It prints the exact sentences a manufacturer may use, and requires that one of them appear on the bag word for word. The claim being tested in this episode is the one almost every buyer makes without noticing, that complete and balanced means the same thing on every bag that carries it. It does not, and what follows is what each version of that sentence certifies, what it cannot certify, and how to tell which one is standing in front of you in the aisle. The method here was documentary rather than experimental. I read the 2024 edition of the official publication of the Association of American Feed Control Officials, which I will call AAFSCO from here on, and within it the model regulations for pet food and specialty. Pet food, concentrating on the regulation that governs intended use statements and nutritional adequacy claims. I read AAFSCO's minimum feeding protocols for dog and cat foods in the version published with the revision marks still visible, which has the useful property of showing not only what the protocol requires now, but what it used to require and what was altered. I read AAFSCO's own consumer guidance on reading labels. Where a figure or a phrase appears in this episode, it is quoted from one of those documents or attributed to the body that published it. The comparison, then, is between 3 routes, exactly as they are written, measured against a single question: what does an animal have to experience, and what does a laboratory have to measure, before a company may print that sentence on a bag? The limits of that method matter more than the method itself, so they go here rather than in a footnote. I tested no food for this episode, I opened no bag, commissioned no analysis, and visited no manufacturing facility. Nothing in this episode is a finding about the contents of any particular product. I have not seen any company's formulation records, laboratory results, or feeding trial data, and none of those documents are public. What a documentary method can establish is what the rules require and what they permit, which is the flaw, not the practice. A company may do a great deal more than the flaw requires, and still print exactly the same sentence, because the sentence is prescribed word for word and contains no room to say that you went further. That cuts in both directions, and it is the single most important thing to carry through everything that follows. This is an episode about what the label is capable of telling you. It is not an episode about who is doing well and who is not. The position of the statement is prescribed along with its wording. The regulation places the statement of nutritional adequacy immediately below the bold line that separates it from the disclaimers following the guarantees, and it recognizes 4 categories that a food may claim: gestation and lactation, growth, maintenance, and all life stages. Then it does something unusual for a labeling rule. Instead of describing what the statement has to convey and leaving the wording to the company, it prints 3 sentences and requires, in its own words, that the claim be stated verbatim as one of them. The first reads, "The name of the product is formulated to meet the nutritional levels established by the AAFSCO dog or cat food nutrient profiles for a blank, and that blank is filled with the life stage." The second reads, "Animal feeding tests using AAFSCO procedures substantiate that the name of the product provides complete and balanced nutrition for a blank, and that blank is filled with the life stage that was tested." The third reads, "The name of the product provides complete and balanced nutrition for a stated life stage, and is comparable in nutritional adequacy to a product which has been substantiated using AAFSCO feeding tests." 3 sentences and 3 routes. Anyone comparing two bags in a shop is comparing those routes, whether or not they know that is what they are doing. The first route, formulated to meet the profiles, is the one most foods take, and it is the one most often misread. The nutrient profiles are tables. Separately for dogs and for cats, and separately for each recognized life stage, they set a minimum concentration for each essential nutrient, and for some nutrients a maximum as well. A food satisfies this route by meeting the requirements those tables set out. The claim on the bag is then a claim about the recipe. This formulation, on the numbers, sits above the minimums and below the maximums. What the regulation does not require is any statement of how the company established that. The nutrient content of a recipe can be arrived at by calculation, taking published values for each ingredient, multiplying by the quantity used, and adding up the result. It can equally be arrived at by sending the finished food to a laboratory and measuring what is actually in it. Both produce the identical sentence on the bag. There is no separate wording for a food that was analyzed rather than calculated, and no requirement to say which was done. That is not an accusation aimed at anybody. A great many manufacturers analyze their finished product, and some analyze every batch. It is a statement about the reading power of the label, which is this: the sentence cannot tell you, and is not designed to tell you. There is a second limit to this route, and it is one the route cannot escape however carefully it is run. A nutrient table records what is present in the food. It does not record what the animal takes out of it. Two foods can carry identical figures for protein and identical figures for zinc while delivering meaningfully different amounts of usable protein and usable zinc to the animal eating them, because digestibility and bioavailability are properties of the ingredients and the processing, not of the arithmetic. This is the standing criticism of the formulation route in veterinary nutrition, and it is a fair one. A spreadsheet cannot show absorption, only an animal can. The second route, animal feeding tests using AAF-SCO procedures, is the one that sounds most impressive on a bag, and it is worth setting out in full because almost nobody who reads the phrase knows what it describes. The protocol for an adult maintenance claim on a dog food requires a minimum of 8 healthy adult dogs, at least 1 year of age and of optimal body weight, to start the test. Females in gestation or lactation are excluded. Every animal must pass a physical examination by a veterinarian before starting. The test runs for a minimum of 26 weeks, which is 6 months, and the test diet must be the sole source of nutrients throughout, water excepted. The same formulation is fed for the whole period, although different production batches may be used. During those 6 months, body weights are recorded at the beginning, weekly, and at the end. Every dog receives a complete veterinary physical examination at the beginning and at the end, with general health, body condition, and coat condition recorded. Any medication given, and the reason for it, must be recorded. If a dog dies during the test, a necropsy is required, and the findings must be recorded. At the end of the test, blood is drawn, and 4 values are measured: hemoglobin, packed cell volume, serum alkaline phosphatase, and serum albumin. 4 values is the whole of the list the protocol requires. Companies are free to measure more, and some do, but 4 is what is asked for. The pass conditions are equally specific. The diet fails outright if any dog shows clinical or pathological signs of nutritional deficiency or excess. No individual dog may lose more than 15% of its starting body weight, and the group average may not fall by more than 10%. On the blood values, the averages must clear stated flaws. Hemoglobin at 14.0 grams per deciliter, with no individual below 12. Packed cell volume at 42%, with none below 36. Albumin at 2.8 grams per deciliter, with none below 2.4. And average alkaline phosphatase must not exceed 150 international units per liter, with no individual above 300. Each of those may alternatively be measured against the testing colony's own historical average or against a concurrent control group by a stated statistical formula. And then there is the provision that changes the shape of the whole thing. A number of dogs not exceeding 25% of those starting the test may be removed for non-nutritional reasons or for poor food intake, with the reason recorded, although removal for poor intake is permitted only during the first 2 weeks. Every dog not removed on those grounds must finish. Work through what that permits at the minimum. A trial that begins with 8 dogs may end with 6 and pass. 2 of the 8 may have found the food unpalatable enough to be taken off it in the opening fortnight, and the food still carries the sentence saying that animal feeding tests substantiate it. There is one more provision worth naming. The maintenance requirement may be satisfied instead by successfully performing the growth or the gestation and lactation protocol in place of running the maintenance protocol at all. None of this makes the feeding trial route worthless. It is a real test on the finished food, with real animals, and it can detect things the arithmetic route structurally cannot, palatability, gross digestibility problems, and any deficiency severe enough to show in 6 months in a young healthy adult. That is a genuinely higher bar than a table of numbers, and it costs a great deal more to clear. But the phrase on the bag invites the reader to imagine something the protocol does not describe. 6 months in 8 healthy adult dogs is a screen for acute failure. It is not, and does not claim to be, evidence about what a diet does across a life. In my view, that gap between what the sentence sounds like and what the protocol requires is the most misleading thing on the back of a pet food bag. I want to be precise that this is my opinion about the impression the wording creates, and not a claim that anybody breached the rule. Every company using that sentence is entitled to use it. The third route is the one almost no consumer knows exists. A food may carry a complete and balanced claim as a member of a product family that is nutritionally similar to a lead product, and that lead product did contain a combination of ingredients fed to animals as the sole source of nourishment under AAFSCO's testing procedures. The similarity must be substantiated according to AAFSCO's published procedures for establishing pet food product families, and the family member must meet the criteria for the life stage claimed. The regulation also gives the state control official a power worth noting. Under circumstances of reasonable doubt, the official may require the manufacturer to perform additional testing on the family product to substantiate the claim. Read plainly, this means a food on the shelf may never have been fed to any animal in a trial, and may still be described as complete and balanced because a related formulation was. There is a defensible logic to it. Running a 6-month trial on every flavor variant of every recipe would be an enormous undertaking in animals as well as in money, and where 2 formulations genuinely are nutritionally equivalent, testing both proves nothing the first did not. The family rule is the reason a brand can offer 15 varieties without running 15 trials. It is also the reason the second sentence, the one saying that animal feeding tests substantiate, is doing less work than it appears to. The comparable in nutritional adequacy wording exists precisely so that family members are distinguishable on the label. A buyer who knows to look for that third sentence can spot one. A buyer who does not will read all 3 as the same phrase, which is how they function in practice. The life stage in the blank is not decoration. Maintenance means an adult animal at a stable weight. Growth means a puppy or kitten. Gestation and lactation means a pregnant or nursing mother. All life stages means the food is claimed to be adequate for every one of those, which in practice means it must satisfy the most demanding requirement among them, which is why an all life stages food is not automatically the safest choice for a sedentary older animal, merely the most broadly claimed one. For dog foods, the regulation adds a requirement that repays learning by heart. When the blank contains the word growth or the phrase all life stages, one of 2 phrases must be added verbatim to the end of the claim, either including growth of large-sized dogs 70 pounds or more as an adult, or, except for growth of large-sized dogs, 70 pounds or more as an adult. Those words exist because the calcium requirements are not the same. Excess calcium during growth is associated with skeletal abnormalities in large breed puppies, and the profiles set a lower ceiling for foods intended to cover them. The regulation allows a company to substantiate an all life stages claim using dogs under 70 pounds, provided the food contains no more calcium and phosphorus than the maximum limits set for large-sized dogs. So, a bag of puppy food carrying the word "except" is not a defective product and not a mislabeled one. It is a food telling a large breed owner, in the plainest terms the regulation permits, that it was not formulated for their puppy. It is 4 words in small print at the end of a long sentence, and it is probably the highest value thing on the entire package. There is a case that shows the distinction better than any argument can, and it is worth stating carefully because it is recent, and it concerns a company that has been named by a regulator. The Food and Drug Administration issued an advisory in March of 2026 concerning Quest cat food, a product marketed by Go Raw, doing business as Steve's Real Food. According to the advisory, the agency tested 8 lots and found thiamine, which is vitamin B1, ranging from non-detectable to 0.85 mg per kilogram, against an AAFSCO minimum for cats of 5.6 mg per kilogram. The agency described the early signs of thiamine deficiency as reduced appetite and vomiting, and the advanced signs as cervical ventriflexion, muscle weakness, an unsteady gait, falling, seizures, and circling, stating that the condition can be fatal if it is not recognized and treated. The company had recalled 1 lot in mid-February and expanded that recall later the same month. At the time of the advisory, the agency stated that 3 of the 8 lots had been recalled. Set aside the specifics of that case, which the agency is handling. The structural point is the one that matters here, and it applies to every bag in every shop. A nutritional adequacy statement is a claim about a formulation and how it was substantiated. It is not a measurement of the bag in front of you. Nothing about the sentence, in any of its 3 permitted forms, verifies the contents of an individual production run. That gap is what recalls and regulatory advisories exist to fill, and it is why the phrase should be read as the beginning of an assurance rather than the end of one. One more change belongs in this episode, because it happened recently and it is widely misunderstood. For decades, the relationship between AAFSCO and the Food and Drug Administration ran through a memorandum of understanding covering the development and review of animal feed ingredient definitions. The 2 bodies announced in August of 2024 that the memorandum would not be renewed, and it expired on the 1st of October that year. In its place, the agency finalized guidance setting out an enforcement policy for AAFSCO-defined ingredients later that October, and in January 2025 finalized a second guidance describing a consultation process by which companies engage with the agency directly about new ingredients. The important qualification is one that most coverage of this skipped. The memorandum concerned ingredient definitions, meaning what a given material may be called and what it may contain. It did not govern the nutrient profiles or the feeding protocols, and their status is unchanged. The sentence on the bag means today what it meant before. It is worth stating one thing plainly alongside that, because it is the most common misconception about this entire subject. AAFSCO does not approve pet foods. It does not certify them, endorse them, or regulate them. It publishes model regulations and nutrient standards that states adopt into law, and enforcement rests with state and federal officials. A bag advertising itself as AAFSCO approved is describing something that does not exist. The verdict on the 3 routes is less satisfying than the question deserves, and pretending otherwise would be its own kind of dishonesty. AAFSCO does not rank the 3 routes against one another, and on the evidence available there is no clean ranking to be had. The feeding trial tests the finished food in living animals and can find problems. The arithmetic cannot, but it does so in 8 animals for 6 months against 4 blood values. The formulation route tests the arithmetic thoroughly, and the animal not at all, but it is applied to every nutrient in the profile rather than to 4. And a company running it with laboratory analysis on finished batches is checking something a 6-month trial never revisits. The family rule extends a real trial to foods that did not undergo one, which is either sensible efficiency or a stretched claim depending entirely on how rigorously the similarity was established, and that is not visible from outside. What can be said without hedging is this. All 3 sentences describe a process, not a measurement of the bag. All 3 describe a minimum, and the difference between them is legible on the package to anyone who knows the 3 forms of words, which is now everyone watching this. So practically, turn the bag over and find the statement below the bold line under the guaranteed analysis. Read which of the 3 sentences it is, formulated to meet animal feeding tests or comparable in nutritional adequacy. That tells you which route the company took. Read the life stage in the blank and check it against the animal you actually own rather than the one on the front of the bag. If it is a dog food and the blank says growth or all life stages, find the phrase at the end about large-sized dogs and read whether it says including or except. If you have a large breed puppy, that word decides whether the bag belongs in your trolley. If the statement says the product is intended for intermittent or supplemental feeding only, that food is not claiming to be a complete diet at all and should not be the whole of one. And if a package tells you it is AAFSCO approved, you have learned something about the company's marketing rather than about the food. None of that takes longer than 15 seconds once you know where to look. It is the single highest value thing an owner can learn to do in a shop, and every other episode on this channel assumes it.